Picture this: a quiet mess hall in a desert military base, the smell of eggs and coffee filling the air, soldiers laughing as they prepare for another day, and then, in a single heartbeat, everything shatters. Explosions rip through the walls, enemy forces storm in, and an entire SEAL team is dragged away in chains, leaving behind only the cook, a woman everyone thought was finished as a fighter. But what happens next will prove that she was far more than just a cook. This is the story of how one woman fought back when her entire team was captured. And if you want more heart-pounding, edge-of-your-seat stories like this, hit subscribe right now, because this is just the beginning. Lieutenant Sarah Keaton had once been one of the toughest SEALs in her class, but an injury to her shoulder had ended her combat role and pushed her into what the brass called a support position. Now, she ran the mess hall. Most of the guys loved her cooking and cracked jokes that she was the toughest chef in the Navy, but no one thought she would ever be back in the fight. That morning was calm, the desert sun rising, the air thick with the smell of scrambled eggs and coffee, choppers thundering in the distance. Then the calm broke. A sudden series of blasts rocked the base, alarms screamed, and before she could even grab cover, Sarah saw it happen through the window. Her SEAL team, her brothers, her family surrounded by insurgents. Smoke grenades blinded them, heavy fire pinned them down, and within minutes they were dragged into trucks, chains biting into their wrists. The gates closed, the dust settled, and the base was left in chaos. Sarah's heart pounded. She wasn't a cook anymore. She tore open the weapons locker near the hall, strapped on a vest, and grabbed an M4. Her hands trembled not from fear but from fury. The people who had just taken her team had no idea what kind of storm they had woken, that the desert night was endless and cold, broken only by the roar of the dirt bike engine as Sarah followed the tracks of the enemy convoy. Every bump on the road reminded her of the stakes, the commander's helpless eyes as he was chained, the shouts of her brothers dragged away. She had no comms, no backup, just 3 mags, a combat knife, a smoke grenade, and her SEAL training. Hours into the chase, she saw their headlights shimmering in the distance and slowed, shadowing them carefully. When the trucks finally disappeared into a hidden quarry, she crawled up to a boulder and watched through borrowed binoculars. The place was a fortress, steel gates, guard towers, barbed wire, mines, and dogs patrolling. Any soldier would have waited for reinforcements, but she didn't have that luxury. They would torture her team before dawn. Sarah scouted all 3 sides. The west was a supply tunnel crawling with guards. The north was sniper-covered cliffs, and the south held a dry drainage ditch with fewer patrols. That was her way in. She painted her face with camouflage, crawled through the rocks, and whispered to herself, "You're not the cook tonight. You're the predator." As a lone wolf howled somewhere in the desert, she slid into the shadows, her mission clear: get inside, find her team, and tear the enemy apart from within. Sarah slid silently through the drainage ditch, the damp earth clinging to her uniform as every muscle in her body braced for the kill or be killed moment. The first guard never saw her coming. Her knife slid across his throat, and she caught his body before it hit the ground, dragging him into the shadows. Taking his rifle, she pressed forward, moving from shadow to shadow with the predator's patience. The compound smelled of oil, sweat, and blood. She passed a line of cages where enemy dogs snarled, their eyes glinting in the dim light, but a quick toss of rations from her vest distracted them long enough for her to slip by. Deeper inside, she heard the muffled cries of her SEAL team, chained inside a storage building like animals, bruised and bloodied, their heads bowed under the weight of defeat. Rage burned in her chest. She needed a diversion. Spying fuel barrels stacked against the wall, she jammed a rag into one, lit it with a match she carried for emergencies, and rolled it into the open. The fire whooshed to life, flames licking the night sky, shouts erupting as guards scrambled to contain the blaze. Smoke cloaked the compound, and Sarah sprinted low across the ground, heart pounding, rifle raised. She burst into the storage building and dropped 2 guards before they could raise the alarm. The sight inside gutted her commander beaten, face swollen, his hands in chains. Her brothers slumped against the wall, their strength fading. She cut through the first set of chains when suddenly a deep voice froze her blood. The cook? The enemy commander stepped from the shadows, a massive man with scars running across his jaw, wielding a combat blade as if it were an extension of his arm. He grinned cruelly. "You think you can take soldiers from me?" He lunged, and the room erupted into violence. Sarah's rifle was slapped away, clattering across the floor. She dodged his blade, slashing back with her combat knife, but her injured shoulder screamed with each movement. He slammed her against the wall, blade pressing dangerously close, and for a moment, the old pain threatened to crush her resolve. But Sarah fought back with pure seal instinct, driving her knee into his gut, twisting free, and grappling for control of the blade. The fight was brutal fists, blood and bone colliding in a storm of violence. Finally, with a roar, she drove the knife into his side and twisted, his eyes widening in shock before he crumpled to the ground. Breathing hard, Sarah didn't even stop to watch him die. She ripped the chains from her commander's wrists, pulled her brothers to their feet, and armed them with weapons taken from the fallen. The fire outside roared louder, alarms blared. Boots thundered toward their position. Sarah knew the entire compound was awake now. The fight had just begun, and if they were going to make it out alive, every second mattered. The compound exploded into chaos the moment. Sarah and the freed SEALs stormed out of the storage building, armed with stolen rifles in raw fury. Alarms wailed, floodlights swung across the yard, and guards poured in from every angle, firing blindly through the smoke. Sarah's instincts took over. She led her battered brothers through cover fire, dropping enemies with precise shots while barking orders like the officer she once had been. They sprinted across the yard, cutting through waves of attackers until they crashed into the motor pool. Dozens of vehicles sat lined in the dust, but heavy fire pinned them down before they could reach the nearest truck. A grenade clattered against the ground. Sarah kicked it back, the explosion tearing a crater where they had stood seconds before. "Move!" she shouted, and the team charged forward, slamming into a troop truck, hot-wiring it under a rain of bullets. The engine roared to life, and Sarah threw the truck into gear, smashing through the gates with sparks flying as the steel twisted and buckled. Freedom should have been ahead, but instead the desert lit up with headlights behind them. The enemy had mobilized fast. Jeeps, technicals mounted with machine guns, and even a hulking armored carrier thundered in pursuit. The chase was relentless. Bullets riddled the truck. Glass shattered. Sparks and dust filled the cab, but Sarah gritted her teeth and kept her hands steady on the wheel. "Keep them off us!" She barked, and the SEALs leaned from the sides, pouring fire back at their hunters. One Jeep flipped and burst into flames, but 2 more took its place, grinding closer. Sarah spotted the edge of a minefield ahead, an old scar from the war, still dangerous, still alive. Without slowing, she swerved into it, weaving between half-buried charges, the enemy jeeps blundering after her. The first blast lit the sky, flipping a vehicle end over end. Then another erupted under the wheels of a pursuing bike, scattering debris across the sand. But the armored carrier stayed locked on, its turret hammering their truck with deafening bursts that tore chunks from the steel. The SEALs fired back desperately, but the armor shrugged off their bullets. Sarah knew they wouldn't last another minute in the open. Then she saw a narrow ravine up ahead, a natural jump if she had the guts to take it. "Hold on!" she yelled, slamming the accelerator to the floor. The truck rocketed forward, bouncing and shaking as it hit the edge. For one heart-stopping second, they were airborne, the desert yawning beneath them, before the truck crashed hard onto the far side, suspension screaming but holding together. The armored vehicle tried to follow, but its heavy weight betrayed it. Its front end crashed into the ravine wall, stuck and struggling. "Now!" One of the SEALs shouted, shouldering an RPG. The rocket whooshed across the night, slamming into the carrier, which vanished in a ball of fire, the explosion shaking the ground like thunder. Dust and flames filled the sky, but Sarah kept driving, pushing the truck toward a ridge where a green flare suddenly arced upward, their extraction point. The thump of rotor blades filled the air as a Black Hawk descended, its searchlight slicing through the smoke. Sarah screeched the truck to a halt, the team piling out, dragging each other toward salvation. Enemy gunfire still cracked in the distance, but the chopper's miniguns answered with a roar, mowing down the last pockets of resistance. Sarah shoved the last man aboard before hauling herself up into the bird, lungs burning, body trembling, eyes still locked on the inferno below. As the Black Hawk lifted into the night sky, the compound shrank behind them, engulfed in flames, a graveyard for the men who thought they could steal her family. In the cabin, silence fell except for the pounding of hearts. The commander, battered but alive, reached across and gripped Sarah's hand, his eyes wet with unspoken gratitude. "We thought we lost you," he rasped, voice breaking, "but you never left us." Sarah looked at him, then at her brothers, every face scarred yet alive, and she finally allowed herself to breathe. She had been underestimated, written off as a cook, but tonight she proved that when the world tries to break you, sometimes you come back sharper, harder, and unstoppable. As the chopper roared toward the horizon, Sarah Keaton sat with blood on her hands and fire in her eyes. No longer just the cook in the mess hall, she was once again a warrior, and the enemy had learned too late what that really meant.